From the CyberHub bunker and studio, you're tuning in to the CyberHub Podcast. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
What's up, LinkedIn? Merry Christmas. How's it going? Joining me on our special Christmas day. If you're alone, you're trying to run away from, your crazy drunk uncle and aunt or family, join me, Charity Wright, the one, the only, the legend, the cyber threat intel expert. What is happening? Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Thanks for having me on today.
I'm so happy to have you on because, it's a fun day today. It's Christmas, obviously. So people are at home. It's a weird Christmas, right? Because, most families aren't there. Like, they're just, everyone's kind of celebrating alone. People are kind of, I don't know how to say it. They're just out and about today, right? So
yeah, we definitely did a virtual Christmas for my family. Even though we all live really close together, we just decided to be safe this year. So me and the kids were set up here at the dining room table. We had everybody on Zoom at the end of the table, and we made it work.
See, but that's a lot of fun. I'm grateful for technology today, right? Because if it wasn't for technology, we go back to the last pandemic, right? So if we go back to the last pandemic 100 years ago, imagine how alone people were.
Yeah. Well, I feel like
they didn't have Netflix
back then too.
They didn't have Netflix.
They didn't have Netflix. They didn't have Wonder Woman, Star Wars, all the favorite holiday movies.
But they did read books way more than we do as people.
Mm-hmm. Likely, yes.
Way more than we do as people. Like, we do not read enough. So for those tuning in here, I am having just quite a challenge getting comments on and seeing who's on. So give me just a moment. I'm going to pull that up here.
Yeah, you know what? Now's a great opportunity for me to shout out to my mom who is tuning in. Thanks, Mom, for being on here.
Hi, Mom.
She's over there like, I don't have anything else to do today. And I was like, well.
For those, Yep, Donna Wright did say hi, Charity. So
okay.
Hi, Donna. I'm glad I was able to pull that up here. So for those tuning in and watching, welcome to today's live stream. Before we get started, though, some difficult news coming out of Nashville, Tennessee this morning, where an RV blew up at 6:30 a.m., injuring 3 police officers and damaging over 20 buildings in downtown Nashville. And our first dog appearance on our Christmas Day special has joined the frame. Those
interrupted a very important moment.
No, it's quite okay, folks. So for those who don't know, at 5:30 a.m. this morning, there was a suspicious vehicle, a suspicious RV that was found in downtown Nashville. Police were called. Special hazardous unit came through, and an hour later, at 6:30 a.m., it blew up, leaving a huge smoke trail in the skyline of Nashville. Nashville, a great city. I mean, I frequent Nashville quite a lot. So it's an intentional act. As you and I speak now, Nashville police is doing a briefing on this. So we'll have more details as it goes, but definitely my heart goes out to the people of Tennessee this morning. 3 injured police officers, one who's apparently lost hearing in his ears. They hope it's temporary from the blast, but the blast was apparently felt for miles.
Wow, that's just tragic.
So, yeah, a very interesting Christmas morning. Nonetheless, 2020 couldn't get any weirder. It just had to be weird on Christmas morning.
We keep saying that, though. I'm just ready for it to be over, and I'm very hopeful for 2021. 2020 has been pretty rough.
I completely agree with you. I'm having just a slight audio issue here. Charity, I'm going to pass it on to you to give him a little bit about yourself while I fix that.
Okay. My name is Charity Wright. I'm a U.S. Army veteran. I served for 10 years total between active duty and National Guard, and I served as a Chinese linguist. So, I joined to be a linguist not knowing what language I'd be assigned to in the Army, that you're going to go learn Mandarin. And I'm like, I don't know about that. I could barely learn Spanish. But somehow I managed to get through, and I really fell in love with the language and the culture. And I was, honored to be able to work at the National Security Agency for several years, collecting there. And that's how I found my way into intelligence analysis. And when I decided to move home to Dallas in 2015, I found my way into a cyber threat intelligence role. And I'll tell you, I fell in love with it. Every day is new and exciting when you're, hunting down hackers and tracking down what nation states are doing to attack each other through cyber tools. So I currently work at Recorded Future. We are a security vendor. And before this, I've worked for various enterprises, helping to set up CPI teams within the security section. So that's a little bit about my career.
Well, first of all, thank you for your service. I know I was supposed to have you on Veteran November, and we couldn't quite get it. So this is, I'm glad we're able to do this beyond Veteran November, because we have a very similar background, and just our first conversation, we just went off on this, like, I don't want to say tangent, but we had such a great little conversation going on, and it wasn't little, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But so before we do that, though, it is Christmas, right? And Christmas is kind of a special time of year. So it's a fun time of year for a lot of people, because it's a time where we get to unwind and spend time with our families. Most people are very cheerful. I live in Atlanta and you live in Texas, so people where we're from are always cheerful, but they're extra cheerful on Christmas, which is great. What's one of your favorite Christmas traditions, Charity?
Oh my gosh, I have to share with you, because this year was the first time we had to do it virtual, so it was kind of interesting. But as a Christian family, I grew up, and my dad was a pastor when I was little. We have developed this tradition of our own where on Christmas Eve we eat a dinner that's kind of like Jesus's Last Supper, and we call it agape supper. Agape means love. And so every Christmas Eve we sit down and we eat traditional foods that we think maybe Jesus enjoyed too: grapes, bread, fish, and we've added in a few of our own little things over the years. After my visit to Israel, I added in hummus. I feel like that is a staple. That must be. But so we do that every Christmas Eve. My dad reads the story of Jesus's birth, and then also, some of the Old Testament prophecies that prophesied his birth. And then as our children have been getting older, the kids get to read part of those stories too from their Bibles. So that's kind of a fun family tradition we have.
So I find Christmas to be very interesting. So my daughter's mom is obviously Christian, and for the last 15 years I've been celebrating Christmas because it's one of the things I've always said is we'll introduce my daughter to both Judaism and Christianity, and whatever she feels comfortable with is what she'll follow, right? Mm-hmm. But at least she can have that identity and she can know a little bit of both. Judaism always loses this time of year. Like, we lose at Christmas. We just do. It's not even a fair competition. It's like the New England Patriots playing, like Southern Alabama University. Like, it's just, there's just no way you're going to beat them. And so we have a tradition of watching movies. We do like Home Alone 2. Die Hard is my personal favorite. I'm glad that 84% of the people that have answered my survey thus far believe that Die Hard is a Christmas movie, because it is. And when she was little, we'd watch like Polar Express. You got to have a little Tom Hanks somewhere in your holiday. I feel like, like Tom Hanks is one of those icons. And What a Wonder. I like classic movies, right? So like last night I watched What a Wonderful Life. I couldn't not watch a 1946 American movie classic like What a Wonderful Life. But it's interesting that you bring up the whole thing of Jesus' Last Supper, because technically Jesus' Last Supper was the eve of the Jewish Passover.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's why when he was breaking bread, they were breaking matzah. They weren't breaking actual bread. Like I learned that in my desire to be able to have a conversation with my daughter about Christmas, is that the Last Supper was actually the night of Passover.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's a very interesting thing. That's a really cool tradition.
Yeah, my grandma, I think my grandma is the one who started it. And then that's my dad's mom. And so we've incorporated it into both sides of the family. Anytime we have relatives over, they join us for agape supper. We used to sit on the floor on a blanket around a little table. And, it's all, handheld foods. And it's very simple, very easy to prepare. It takes the stress out of, we don't have to prepare a big Christmas Eve dinner, and it's something that we can do even when we're apart. So, when I was in the military, we used to do that. I was stationed in Hawaii. So we would do that as a little.
What a rough place to be stationed at.
Oh, man.
I mean, that's such a difficult place to serve, Hawaii.
The whole 6 years. Yeah.
Oh man, that is definitely a fun place to be at from the military. So, talk a little bit about the Christmas in the military. What was that like?
Oh goodness. Well, every year was different. Not only was I active duty, but I was married to an active duty sailor, and he deployed a lot on ships and submarines. So there were a lot of Christmases where it was just me and the babies when they were little. But we had a church family in Honolulu, and that really meant a lot to me to have a group of people that I could call family away from home. So, you kind of roll with it. I feel like being in the military really has helped prepare me for how rough this year has been, because you don't always get to do things the way you want, and sometimes things just don't work out how you want. And one of the military skills you learn is just to roll with it. You can't always have control.
You learn to alter really quick, right? Like you're just you pivot really fast, and you always have this playbook in your head of if something goes in. I don't know if it's the same for you, but anywhere public I go, and if it's my first time there, right, I'm always like studying the place, right? It's funny at a conference sometimes. One time someone pointed out to me, they go, James, it's very hard for you to keep eye contact when we're in a large public place. And I'm like, military habit, man. Like I'm always scanning around, and I can't have my back to a large group of people. Like I'm always shifting my body and trying to move to find that one spot I want to be in where I know I have command and like a bird's eye view into everything that's in front of me and very little behind me, right? And I do that all the time.
Have you ever gone to a public place to eat with a whole group of military people, and like you're all like fighting for the spot where your back is against the wall and you have the view of the whole restaurant? Yeah. Everyone wants that spot.
And people want the spot where they have, like I said, a bird's eye view on everything. It's horrible because, when we get together, like we can't go to a public restaurant because there's literally that fight. And then you're like, dude, just sit there. I'm watching your back. And I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't know what you've been doing since we've discharged. You've put on 15 pounds. You seem a bit slow. Like, I don't know, buddy. I don't know.
If you would be the first to let us know.
Yeah, if you'd be the first to let us know, or if you'd be too busy eating your tacos and my brain would be blown up by the time you're done.
Yeah. Well, also as a female, I have had this situation before where, I might be going out to dinner with a chivalrous man, and he wants to have his back against the wall and look out, and I'm like, I'm Army, so I kind of okay. I'll let you.
Oh, it's
fun.
So there's this really it's so true though, because it's like part of our nature, right? It's like, go to RSA, you know, where all the Army people gather, like at military or DEF CON or RSA, we gather in the corner where everyone's got their, like, it's always a corner, right? It's got to be a corner, because if it's not like one of these corners, so we can all kind of, we're not in a circle, we're like at a 90-degree angle standing shoulder to shoulder. And that way everyone's got a bird's eye view.
That's funny. I just imagine everyone back to back, like looking around, got you covered.
Yeah, like we're all doing like the star routine, right? Hey, I'm not looking at you, you're not looking at me, but how's it going, buddy? Right?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
What's happening? Or you're finding yourself having this, you know, like that's why we congregate around coffee and water stations, because coffee and water stations are always next to a wall.
It's true. Also, in thinking of Vegas, DEF CON, Black Hat, it's really, you can really pick out the military people when you walk into a Vegas nightclub, because they're the ones that are like stone cold. They might have a drink in their hand, but it hasn't really kicked in yet, and they're the ones like scoping everything out, just like looking really like uptight. Or they're the ones with their backs against the bar looking out at everything. I can almost always identify them and be like, veteran, military.
Well, because we see that, right? Like that's really, really, we recognize each other quickly. And and it's really simple, because if someone who's been like recently discharged, they'll always say sir or ma'am, right? Like, yes sir, yes ma'am, and you're like, okay, where'd you serve? What'd you do?
And I'm not a ma'am. You call me sergeant.
Yeah. And I'm not a sir. Please don't call me sir. I still like to think I'm young. I only like when my daughter's friends call me sir or Mr. Azar. That's about the only people that I want to call me sir or Mr. Azar. But
my little nephew calls me Miss Dee Dee instead of Aunt Dee Dee. Dee Dee is my nickname. And I don't even mind it, because Miss makes me feel young.
Miss Dee Dee, yeah, it's so funny. So let's talk a little bit cyber. I know it's Christmas, and people want to talk Christmas, and some of our comments are all Christmassy, and shout outs to everyone that's tuning in. But let's talk a little bit cyber, because cyber has, the last few weeks have been really, really crazy. There's been a bunch of stuff around SolarWinds, and there's this narrative that's been adopted, almost like the narrative that happened when Sony was breached, right? People remember Sony was breached, and they're like, it's the North Koreans because they did the movie The Interview, and you're like, no, it's really not. But all it took was one bad journalist to write something in a major publication to make that be the narrative.
Yeah.
And that's the narrative. And I find myself still having to correct people, because I'm like, North Korea didn't just deploy hackers to hack Sony. They were in Sony before the movie came out. They were ransomwaring Sony. Sony refused to pay. They then sold all of it to the North Koreans, and the North Koreans essentially published it all as a, F you to Sony. And now we have something similar with SolarWinds. What are your thoughts?
Oh man, this is a huge mess, and it's going to take a very long time to figure it out. I was looking through a list of victims this morning, and the list keeps growing, but I've really been digging into who these victims are and what they're responsible for, because I think that's going to give us some hints as to what the threat actors were going after. So one of the things that really caught my eye was, we heard the U.S. Department of Commerce was one of the government agencies, but specifically, it's the Department of Commerce's National Telecommunications and Information Administration. They are essentially responsible for the implementation of 5G technology in America. Interesting, right?
Indeed. Coincidence?
No.
Maybe.
There's also, Department of Energy, Homeland Security, National Nuclear Security Administration, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. What's interesting, the FERC, it shows that 2 of their national laboratories were part of this incident. And I looked it up, and what they do there, they conduct atomic research related to both civil nuclear power and nuclear weapons. So we're talking about really vital intelligence for our national security, and the threat actors that are going after it have a vested interest in what we're doing, how we're doing it, how we're going to implement things, contracts with vendors. There's just so much valuable information in these agencies.
Yeah, it's so attribution has been kind of almost everyone's saying it's Russia, and I've made my voice clear on this. There's nothing in here that says Russia. So telecommunication is not something the Russians are traditionally known to go after.
Yeah.
Telecom. So this kind of goes into our days as linguists, right? And kind of looking at the geopolitical landscape. And so here's an idea. Let me lay out this concept real quick. And Filippo says that cyber criminals don't take holidays. I completely agree, Filippo. They really do not take holidays at all. But nation states especially don't. There's been multiple wars across the world that have started on the eve of holidays or in the lead up to a holiday or on a holiday, hoping to catch your adversary with their guards down. Mm-hmm. So here's my theory. From a geopolitical perspective, we've been engaged in a trade war with China for now 2.5, 3 years, just about. We've essentially now blacklisted any Chinese telecommunication software or hardware from the U.S. infrastructure. Mm-hmm. We've been able to recruit other nations to do the same, mainly Australia and their Prime Minister Morrison, who's been taking it to China. He's been just, there's, $1 billion worth of Australian coal that's just parked off the coast of China, and China won't take it in, but China now has rolling blackouts. People are dying from the cold. They don't have enough food. They started a new food initiative. It's crazy, right? So China traditionally goes after, with everything going on now, and then the China papers. Like, I can't believe the China papers wasn't a bigger news story. I think it was, if not bigger, than as big as the Edward Snowden and WikiLeaks leaks of our former agencies that we served under from a military perspective, right? When you expose 1.95 million Chinese nationals that have infiltrated, that are part of the Chinese Communist Party, that have infiltrated some of the world's largest organizations at multiple levels, including some of our very own congressmen and senators, right? You start to look at this and go, something is fishy here. And then SolarWinds happens like 3 days. And then the FireEye thing.
Yeah.
Russia doesn't steal offensive tools. That's below Russian ego. Like, Russia doesn't steal offensive tools. They don't do that because they believe they have the best offensive tools. They know they do that better.
Yeah, I can tell you who does steal proprietary information to duplicate technology. China.
China.
I'm not saying this whole hack was only China, but what I have seen so far about these breaches, I do believe that it could be Russia and China, not necessarily together, but I believe they have probably both had a part in this. But we have yet to see the intel behind attribution. We haven't seen, we've heard a few of the officials, Barr, Pompeo, speak about how it's likely Russia, but we don't have that classified intel access. Well, I don't.
So people take Pompeo's comment as saying it was Russia. And what Pompeo said, if you read, so this is the problem. This is why people don't trust the media anymore, right? Mm-hmm. They take one line and they spin it to make it seem the narrative that they're trying to sell. And you and I have had this discussion around this narrative before Merry Christmas to Filippo. He wishes us both Merry Christmas. Going forward, guys, in January, these live streams will be done in a different platform. We'll be able to see comments on the screen, all the good stuff. So don't worry about that. But I will say this. What Pompeo said is the initial intel report shows that some of the tools utilized were Russian. However, everything else doesn't have any indication of Russia. Now, they've ignored that second part of the statement. And what's funny is when Pompeo said that, he was announcing new sanctions by the State Department on China.
Yeah. So here's a good point. People ask why attribution matters, or does it matter? I'm going to argue that it does matter because we're living in a world where there are consequences for attribution.
Absolutely.
We're talking about indictments, breaking off diplomatic ties, shutting down embassies. I mean, there are serious consequences when you blame a particular nation for conducting a state-sponsored attack. So that's why it's important for us to take our time, analyze the intelligence that we have, and really make sure that we know what we're dealing with before we pin it on any particular nation. As soon as I heard about this incident, I was actually at my mom's house, and my head immediately was like, maybe it's China. But that was without any real solid information about it. That's based solely on the fact that I specialize in China, especially when it comes to cyber and geopolitical issues. And they've been awfully quiet this year. They've been very quiet through the election season. At Recorded Future, we've been monitoring disinformation and countering disinformation. And there really hasn't been a lot of election influence activity out of China this year, which was kind of surprising to me. But I've just been sitting back wondering, what are they doing? Because we know they have military units dedicated to offensive security activity. They have 9-to-5s, sitting at a desk. If you don't see them, it's not because they're not doing anything. It's because they're being very quiet and they're undetected. And so, this whole year I've just kind of been anticipating something from them. So when I heard about this incident, I thought, okay, here's what we know: FireEye, stolen security tools. Okay, now we're looking at SolarWinds, which really reminds me a lot of the 2019 CloudHopper campaign. I don't know if you guys remember CloudHopper, but it was only a year and a half ago that we discovered, China had conducted this major campaign, targeted information, IT companies basically, and got in through cloud resources. And I mean, that impacted so many organizations. But you know how this industry is. One campaign happens, we talk about it for a while, and then we're on to the next thing. And it's important for us to know our history and know our adversaries and what they're capable of, and what their habits are. And that's, when I heard about SolarWinds, I immediately thought, man, sounds a lot like CloudHopper.
I agree. It does sound a lot like Cloud Hopper, and it's good that you brought that up. The other aspect, I think, when it comes to attribution that a lot of people don't understand, especially some of the tech media people who are not cyber folks, is tools are sold, and different nation states will use different offensive tools to throw you off the trail, right? So if the entire trail points to Russia and it's too easy, like this was, Russia's not that careless. Russia's not that bold, and Russia has no interest in doing that. As someone who's been to Russia, and I have a lot of friends and a lot of people that I know that are part of the Russian apparatus here domestically and abroad, a lot of things just don't add up with this being Russia. It's too easy, right?
Well, I mean, I don't want to dismiss all the work that the investigators are doing and all the forensic work going into this, but the media, of course, jumped on it very quickly and said an anonymous source close to the investigation said it might be Russia. That's not intel. That's speculation.
Well, and I love it that an anonymous source is really reliable. That makes me feel really
a clearance and they can't speak on the record. But.
So that makes me really confident. The other part of this is in a classified briefing this week, and I was texting you about it earlier this week, and I'll talk slightly about it. I can't give you too much. Several senators and congressmen came out and said, we believe this is Russia and it requires an answer. And so I was able to get some information from that briefing, and I can't share too much of it, but I will say it's very careless for these people to do that. So we're not dismissing what the investigators are saying, but like any investigation, if I'm looking to attribute this to someone, right, I am going to come with a preconceived notion that this person is guilty.
Yeah.
And I am going to look at that as a guide point to what I'm trying to investigate. And that's always going to be what I'm looking at. I'm going to be like, well, this piece of evidence doesn't add up to this guy, so let's get rid of it. It's probably not important. But you're like, but it's a piece of evidence, right? Yeah. And that there's a challenge with that. And I think in cybersecurity, we look for attribution, and attribution's important. There needs to be a better discussion around attribution. And Chris Roberts posted something earlier this week, and he's like, how about we stop pointing the finger at who we think it is and start focusing on the remediation and how do we deal with breaches of this size going forward. And I was like, well, that's a really good point. But I think the challenge with attribution is most cyber people aren't looking at attribution, right? Like, we want to know. Curiosity killed the cat, right? Like, we want to know. But at the same time, we're all focused on, our heads are down and we're working and we're dealing with it.
Yes.
But the business side is saying, well, was it Russia? You're not getting the question, that question of what do we do? That question was answered 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Right? The questions now are, was it Russia? Do you think it was Russia? And that's where we have to answer to business, because guess what? If you don't, people lose interest.
Yeah.
And then that becomes a situation of a boardroom question, and to go, well, it's the Russians. And some of us, unfortunately, and I know, speaking to a lot of my peers, the idea of attribution could mean more money for their program.
Yeah, I mean, especially working as a security intelligence vendor, of course, you want your research group to be able to name an APT or to call out attribution, because those are headlines. But what we really care most of all is that we're accurately reporting on threats, no matter what that looks like, cybercrime or state-sponsored. We need to put intelligence in the hands of the defenders and the decision makers, like CISOs, so that they can, really look at the business side, like you're talking about, and go, okay, this is what we're facing. This is what they're after. This is how we're going to protect ourselves. What can we do better? AAR, like an after action report,
Yeah, there's a piece to that for the. You bring up a really good point about the AAR and the after action report, which is really critical. I will say I commend FireEye for giving out a lot of information early on. They helped a lot of us, myself included as a CISO, in evaluating our response, our remediation, and our investigation, our internal investigation.
Yes.
Right? So I hope and pray that more organizations do this.
Yes. I mean, who's to say how long it would have taken for these other impacted organizations to detect this kind of activity if FireEye hadn't come out publicly and said, look, this sucks, but this is what's happening. And yes, we're a security company, but they came after us too. And I think that I commend them as well. Yeah. And I'm wishing them the best. I know they're going through a really hard time. But because of that courage and bravery for them to come out and be transparent, then they can notify all the other potentially impacted organizations. And also, kudos to Velexity as well. I know they have named the threat actor Dark Halo, and they analyzed a part of the campaign where a threat actor targeted think tanks, which is also really important to understand what the threat actors are going after. Now, I can't confirm if it's the same threat group as the one that targeted SolarWinds. I think Velexity made that attribution. But kudos to them as well for coming out and saying, look, we see similarities between these campaigns, and we think Dark Halo is the same threat actor.
So there's similarities between different campaigns, and sometimes what's really important for people to understand is cyber is a very difficult game for attribution, because we're basing data on something that was previously done. And if it wasn't done like that previously, then we're likely to jump to attribution based on signatures within the the malware that's within the system, or point of entry, where'd they go, how'd they move laterally within the network, stuff like that. To me, SolarWinds was, people exaggerate, and I don't mean exaggerate, but some people want to say, oh, this is so I heard some elected officials say this is like the Pearl Harbor in a cyber perspective, and I'm like, okay, guys, slow down. Down.
I'm not into hyperbole. I also don't agree with statements that this is cyber war. I think cyber war is a very sensitive term that should be used for attacks on critical infrastructure, creating destruction, things like that. But, like I said on CBS News this week, this is definitely cyber espionage, and we need to focus on what were they going after? What was their bounty, when we're analyzing this attack? Not only the tactics, tools, and techniques that they use to get in and stay in undetected, but also what are they going after? Because it is espionage.
Yeah, and it's espionage at a very high level, and very few nations have the resources to do this, mainly too. And we have to look at that and just slightly wonder what's going on in that aspect. But not to get stuck on SolarWinds too long, guys. I know it's Christmas, and attribution is really important. The other one is, I don't know if you've been watching what's been going on in Israel ever since the Israelis allegedly took out Mohsen Farizadeh, the father of the Iranian nuclear program, very close to the Ayatollah there.
Yes.
There's been a bunch of ransomware attacks. Now there's Pay-to-Key, a new ransomware attack that's targeting Israeli organizations. And there they have attribution, and the Israelis have really stepped up attribution. They're posting pictures and names of the Iranian state actors that are doing this. And this is kind of the I want to say Iran knows better I love the dogs coming in. Iran knows better than to maybe militarily act against Israel. But we did see, just so people know, like last night, there was an attack in Syria alleged by Israel. And I say alleged because Israel rarely claims responsibility for attacks. That according to several intel reports I read this morning, killed 20 Iranian officers and soldiers that were in Syria, probably planning to launch an attack against Israel at some point or another, with Hezbollah. And that's really interesting because we're watching how Iran responds to this. And let's not forget that Iran launched missiles at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad just a few days ago as well. And President Trump came out and said, hey, tread lightly because, I'll bomb you to oblivion, is his words in a short order of statement. But that's very, 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 very true here. Is we're watching physical military attacks now being answered in cyberspace and targeting civilians. So the Iranian hackers are targeting Israeli corporations. They targeted an Israeli cybersecurity company and published all the username and passwords of all of its customers, and many of those customers were government organizations and some of the largest defense contractors in Israel. So, and they're doing it all. They're not asking for ransom. They're hacking, and they're going on their Telegram channel where they're letting anyone in, and they're just posting all the information for free. And it's kind of the idea of trying to burst the Israeli superiority cyber bubble. It's psychological warfare using cyber. And you talked about espionage. But, I mean, we've been seeing that in the States now for over a decade.
Yeah. Do you think that these recent attacks on Israel are retaliation for the peace deals being done in the Middle East?
No. So Iran understands one thing. The peace deals that have just happened are just the coming out party of what's been a intel coalition since Obama warmed up to Iran. Right? The only thing right now is it's public. Right? The peace deal between the Emirates and Bahrain and Morocco and Sudan, and who else? I'm forgetting one more nation.
You said Emirates, right?
Yeah, the Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco, and Bhutan. In Asia, right? So they're all in this, and they're all kind of. This is more of an alliance of sorts, right? And here's the difference, and I don't mean to get all geopolitical this morning, but I think this is really important for a lot of people to point out because they don't understand the difference. And on Christmas, we should understand the difference. Today, for a lot of people, symbolizes the birth of the Christian faith, the birth of the redeemer of the Christian faith, and for Muslims, it's the birth of the great prophet Isa. And so there's a lot of there's a lot of correlations with a day like today. But let me break this down. 20 years ago, we looked at the Ayatollahs and the Shia Islams as a little bit more moderate. Because the Sunnis, we saw Al-Qaeda come out of there. We saw ISIS come out of that. We've seen a lot of the terror. Hamas is Sunni. Hezbollah is Shia. And Shia was predominantly in Iran and the Chechenian part of Russia and the part of China that's Islam, the Uyghurs of China. They predominantly are more Shia than Sunni. And here's what happened. Sunni with the oil deals in the 60s and 70s, right? And kind of the westernization of the leaders. So while the king of Saudi Arabia won't recognize Israel, the Saudi-Israel deal will happen the moment the king steps down. The only objection to it is the King Salman, and he's old school. The guy's like 90 years old, right? The younger generation, though, the younger generations of leaders like Sheikh Al Nahyan in the Emirates, or the Sheikh in Bahrain, they're all Western educated. So they went to schools in London and California and New York, and they lived in Switzerland, and they made friends with Jews and Israelis, and they broke bread, and they went out to clubs together, and they hung out. And now they come to understand Israel's not a threat to us. Iran's a greater threat to us because Iran's ultimate goal is to take over Mecca and Medina.
Yeah.
The Ayatollah's goal in the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979 was to take over Mecca and Medina. And they realized that in order to take over Mecca and Medina, they had to get rid of the two devils. The big devil, us. The small devil, Israel. Because that was, the U.S. was the backer in the region to Saudi Arabia. We've got military installations in Saudi. We have troops based in Saudi. We have very strategic things that we do with the Saudi Arabia. Now, here's the interesting piece to that, and I don't mean to go off on a stint, but this is very, very, very it's very important to understand, because that's the shift. The Sunni Islamic movement now has become less radicalized and has become more, I don't want to say more adopting to Western society, because they still don't really approve of the LGBTQ community. Right?
They're more tolerant, maybe?
They're a bit more tolerant, but they realize that it's going to take another 2 generations to get it to where we are today. And we as Westerners also have to understand why. Right? Because it's the dying off of an old generation that allows a younger generation to come in. In Lebanon, which was before the rise of Hezbollah in Lebanon in the 80s, and before the Palestinians went in there, when Lebanon was a French, essentially, colony, they had topless beaches in Beirut.
Yeah.
That's Lebanon. Lebanon was supposed to be what Dubai is today. People forget that, but then the Islamists came in and completely destroyed it. And what I mean by Islamists, I mean Hezbollah and the PLO. Yasser Arafat destroyed Lebanon. Yasser Arafat came in and he butchered Christians. Entire villages of Christians were killed by the PLO. Those are the people that today some people want Israel to do peace with. The Palestinian Liberation Organization was killing Christians in Lebanon when they were kicked out of Jordan and Syria because they were causing too much trouble. And they were able to go into Lebanon, and Lebanon was ruled by 2 large Christian factions, and the Christian factions were at odds. And then they just started... There's an entire documentary on this on YouTube called Lebanon, and I urge anyone to watch it. They've gotten the facts absolutely to the spot. I mean, they've got footage of what the PLO did to Christians, and how they bombed entire villages, ravaged, killed men and women, were setting up checkpoints, and if you showed up to the checkpoint and your name wasn't a Muslim name, they would shoot you in the head right then and there.
Wow. You know, the region is just fascinating. The history, the relationships, the development of the whole region. It's really fascinating. And like you said, it's so important for us to understand the history and the different perspectives of the history in that region. Personally, I find it fascinating. I love geopolitics. I'm not as much a history buff, and you definitely understand the region more than I do, but I thank you for giving us, that information. I think that's really important.
I think that answers your question is what Iran doing in answer to the peace deals? No. Iran understands that what these peace deals do is keep it at bay. And so they're trying to support that through insurgency. But because they have no money, they can no longer afford to fund Hezbollah and Hamas. like they used to.
Mm-hmm.
So what they're trying to do now is they're trying to spread disinformation and misinformation, which goes right back to what you do day to day, is understand that disinformation and misinformation, where all of a sudden communism videos about China are being viewed like, China's might be communist, but, it's nice here. And I'm like, what?
You bring up a good point, and that is, we live in this world where there's so much information. It's like information overload, and we have to discern what's true and what's false. It's so difficult right now because we really, when we're analyzing information to figure out what's being disseminated, what narratives are being pushed, it's important to understand the sources and what are their priorities. Like, there is an objective behind it. There's a reason for pushing a particular narrative or for amplifying foreign media. A lot of what has happened this year during our election season, and it's not particular to US, actually it's happening all over the world, but we're monitoring for foreign disinformation. But what we found was a lot of it was started domestically in the US, conspiracy theories and such. And then we're monitoring which foreign nations are pushing these narratives and sharing it, and what is their goal behind that. So, you brought up the history in the Middle East and Iran and the whole situation going on there. And we also watch Iran very closely for disinformation and what they're pushing to, whatever suits their political needs.
So here's the funny part, though. Iran is just as threatened by China as we are.
Oh, I bet.
So the Silk Road Initiative, right, the Belt and Road Initiative, Silk Road 2.0, right, that China's promoting, has so much to do with cyber.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're cybersecurity people, and I think we need to start realizing that cyber isn't a single breach. It's not a single malware, and it's not a single activity. It's a collective activity. And this collective activity has to do with a wider political agenda when we're examining nation states. So when I look at nation states like Iran, or when I look at Hamas, and so Hamas does these campaigns on mobile apps. So what they'll do is they'll launch mobile apps in Android that are dating apps, and they'll post young, beautiful women, and they'll target Israeli soldiers through their geolocation and send malware on soldier devices in Israel. So compulsory service, right? By the way, we've seen this happen in U.S. bases. We just don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Right? Foreign U.S. bases, we know we have foreign nations that are setting up apps that are like similar to Tinder or Bumble or all those other ones, and they're targeting U.S. soldiers. Right?
Yeah, I can tell you the Army commands and the leadership and Cybercom are definitely talking about it in their circles. But, for OPSEC purposes, they try not to let that stuff get out too far.
Right, but again, what we're seeing is the fact that cyber is no longer this siloed, they're wanting to infect my computer and ransom me for $1 million.
Oh, yeah.
It's part of a larger scheme of things. You're a China expert. And I think one of the things I loved about our conversation, and I'd like you to just take a few minutes to explain it, which is the long-term China goal and how China really does operate in cyberspace and how calculating they are. Could you give some of our listeners a little bit of that background?
Absolutely. So China, in my opinion, China is one of the most calculated decision makers in the world. Going back to, if you've ever read The Art of War, they are really masters in getting into the minds of their adversaries and taking their time in very calculated ways. So we're talking about long-term objectives here. If we have, let's say in the United States, we have goals and objectives, but those are usually aligned to our political parties. It takes a lot longer to achieve those objectives if we don't have some kind of unification between the parties. China does not have that problem. They are ran by the Communist Party of China. They are one mind, one objective, one vision, Their leaders lead from the front and everyone follows suit. Okay, this is our goal. We're all going to work together towards that goal. And they're not in a rush. Their objective is world dominance. They don't want to be second or third in the world order. They want to be first. As a matter of fact, the word China in Chinese is Zhongguo, and it literally translates to center country. And they do believe that's a big part of their worldview, is that they are the center of the world, and that the rest of the world order will fall behind them someday. In order to achieve that, they are very strategic. We're talking about economic strength and power. That's what they're going after. They have natural resources. They have human resources more than anyone else in the world. So when they are focusing all of those resources towards one goal, which is economic power in the long term, they're looking out at 2050. And they're going, okay, if we're going to reach this goal, let's be very careful about it. Let's be very strategic. Like you brought up the Belt and Road Initiative. China is buying up land and ports all over the world, and they're starting to own major chunks of this earth. I was doing some research earlier this year, and I was talking about it in terms of cyber colonialism, where they are buying up land in foreign countries, setting up internet infrastructure, and then they own and run that internet infrastructure. They have complete control over it. All of the information flowing through there, they have access to, just like they do in their own country. That's a major stake in the world right now. And so, they're very strategic. They plan things out. They love to save face on the global stage, which is a big part of their culture. So they will deny involvement in breaches, and they will deny human rights violations. But that is to position themselves in a place where they're going, no, look, we're doing things the right way. We're the good guys. Look how well our system works here. And look how messed up democracy is in certain countries around the world. So they're really trying to position themselves as the experts, and that communism is the correct path for the world to go to. And they're trying to point out all the flaws of democracy by, spreading, amplifying certain narratives, teasing, the United States for election issues this year. And they're really just trying to position themselves as the trusted authority around the world, especially to countries that are smaller and weaker and need assistance from China.
And countries are taking them up on it. That's the scary piece of it, right? So countries, and they're giving these predatory loans to these countries where they know these countries have no way of paying it back. Mm-hmm. And eventually they're going to own this seaport, this airport, this mine, this oil field, this natural gas, this farm, all this land that's for farming. And it's very interesting. A buddy of mine who's in Intel showed me a story that was published in China, and it was kind of like a video talking about China in 2050. And they were showing downtown New York with the American flag, right? Like the New York Stock Exchange, but it had communist symbols on it. And it was the American flag, but instead of the 50 states and the stars, it had the communist hammer, the communist symbol on it. And they said, you see, in 30 years, America will have adopted communism and will be communist. And that's the propaganda they're selling their people internally. And that's some of the stuff we here in the States are falling for. And
yes.
And we kind of need to remember, we have a constitution that's 4 pages long, but my God, it's probably one of the, beyond the spoken word of God. The U.S. Constitution is one of the smartest documents ever written by man at the time that it was written. Mm-hmm. Right?
Absolutely.
So the word of God is the word of God, and that is the smartest words ever given, but they weren't given by man, they were given by God. Mm-hmm. Right? So there is nothing greater than God. And not to get all biblical, it is Christmas. If you have a problem with it, you can tune out right now. But the U.S. Constitution is the smartest document ever written by man, and it was 4 pages long, but it's been guiding us for 200 and some odd years, and it's been a very good guiding principle to keep man free and to eliminate tyranny.
So, you pointed out something really important too, is that the narratives that Russia and China want us to believe, that a certain political party is more associated with communism than another. This is psychological warfare.
It is.
We're talking about, they are trying to convince Americans to be adversaries against each other. And that is their goal. China and Russia both have a shared objective of dividing our democracy and dividing our people. So it's really important for Americans to understand what the goals of our adversaries are and what kind of false information they're feeding you. I believe in our democracy. I believe in Americans, and I think that we will come out on top of this, but spreading awareness of this is going to help too.
I will say this. I have never been more excited for a year than I am for 2021. And I'll tell you why. And then I want to hear your predictions. And we're about an hour mark, folks, so we'll be done here in a few minutes, I promise, and let you get back to your Christmas Day festivities. 2021 is the year of America's awakening from its division. It's going to be a year where people will no longer be silent, but the idea war will win again. Let us speak our ideas and let the best idea win. That's what this nation was based off of, right? Public Town Square. I do a show every Wednesday called the Tech Town Square, where we talk technology and we talk Town Square. It's at 7 o'clock Eastern on YouTube, and in January we'll be bringing it on here on LinkedIn as well and on Twitter. And it's a fun conversation because the idea is technology is today's method of information and discerning of information in the town square. So what used to be, it's really, I'll tell you a funny story, and sorry, I'm going to go on a rant here for just a minute. I go to this little town in Israel. And in this little town in Israel that I go to, because we have a small dev office there, there's the town square. Literally, the town square, what you think of a town square. A small mall, a bunch of restaurants, right? Simple food. And you've got these falafel shops. And for people who don't know, a falafel shop in Israel is kind of like what a diner is in the States, right? Like a diner in a small town is where you go when you hear all this stuff. Sometimes it's right next to the gas station. Sometimes it's kind of its own standalone establishment on Main Street. And you go to the diner and you sit down and you can order eggs, pancakes, and bacon. And you can just sit there and you can have a conversation, and it's where people speak their minds, right? So the falafel shops in these town squares are essentially where people speak their mind. And I was there over the summer, and I sat down at one of those falafel shops, and there were people that were probably in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. They're playing backgammon, and some of them are playing chess. And they're talking, and they're talking about politics. They're talking about world affairs. They're talking about COVID. Talk about everything freely, and they disagree, and they keep playing their game. And to me, that was that reinforced my belief in humans. Yeah. And that's what I believe 2021 will be. We'll be going back to the town square, where you and I don't have to agree on everything, but we can agree on one thing. It's the greatest country on the planet. And we can agree on other things, that we all share a value that, we want to respect others and we want to be respected. Right? And my belief is that 2021 is going to be that year. Is it going to be easy? No, because there's a few voices that are trying to discern the greater majority of people who just want to live and let live. Yeah. And I think people are catching up to the China and Russia plan, and I think those plans are unfolding in front of our very eyes. I think people see the greatness that exists within each other. I see the greatness in my neighbors. I see the greatness in my community. I see the greatness in the cybersecurity community, right? So there is an aspect to that where I see the global cyber community now fighting this same target together where, look at the CTI League post-COVID, right? What Ohad and his crew were able to bring together.
Yes.
Unbelievable. People from all walks of life.
Yes.
Right?
When I logged in and I joined, I was just so amazed at all of the names from all over the world. Some people that I had met, speaking at conferences or whatever, and other people I had not met before, but I had heard of. And I was just so proud that there are so many people in our industry that really do care and understand that there are people, there are jobs, there are companies, and all of their livelihoods depend on security, and surviving this year. I mean, we had no idea what it would turn out to be, but I'm so proud of CTI League.
Me too. Shout out to Ohad this Christmas and the work he did in kind of making this idea a reality, and then making it be so effective and bringing so many people. And that's what gives me hope for 2021. And that's it. Now, what's your hope for 2021?
I'll be really quick. I am also an optimist. I do believe things are going to get better. I think part of the reason it's going to get better next year, at least in cybersecurity, is we're going to learn a lot of lessons from these recent breaches. As the investigations continue, we're going to be learning so much about where our weaknesses and vulnerabilities are, and we'll be better set for 2021 to defend against those and, be on the cutting edge and really provide solid intel to the industry and to businesses all over the world. I think that despite this being a state-sponsored or allegedly a state-sponsored attack, I think it kind of overshadowed how big cybercrime was in 2020. I do predict that cybercrime is going to continue to be one of the top problems in 2021. And we're talking about, cyber criminals making money off of things like ransomware, billions of dollars of ransomware. But the industry is coming together with businesses and leaders and finding ways to circumvent that and get around it. And I think law enforcement's really going to step up a lot next year to counter those criminals. I am hopeful. I know it's not going to be easy. We're still dealing with COVID, and we're still dealing, with the ramifications of these recent breaches. But I am excited to go into 2021. We're all going to learn together from 2020 for sure.
So I want to say this, Charity. Thank you for taking an hour and 7 minutes out of your Christmas day to join me. I'm so grateful that you came, and I love this conversation. The feedback, Asif, thank you so much for tuning in, buddy. Asif, also a fellow veteran, one of our own. So thank you so much. And he loved our conversation. He goes, this is probably one of the most interesting conversations he's listened to in a while.
We keep it real.
Well, I think there's an aspect of being able to speak our minds freely, but in a respectful manner, right? And that's so important for any conversation. That's why I do the Tech Town Square.
Yeah.
It's Eddie and myself. Eddie Doyle, if you guys don't know Eddie, he's an amazing guy. Eddie and I hang out for about an hour every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. And we just talk about stuff, everything, right? I did the first, I kind of uncracked the supposed unleashed Kraken that was promised to people over Dominion. And I said, guys, there's no evidence anywhere of this. Don't fall for this. If there was something, it had nothing to do with Dominion, right? Understand, yeah, do computers have glitches? If anyone works in technology, yes, there's glitches. By the way, if you're an accountant and you do manual books, do you not make mistakes?
Yeah.
So I'm all for fairness and objectivity. But when I'm not objective, I let people know, I'm not objective on this. Right. Yeah. And I think that's really important to define what you can be objective about and define certain aspects where, you're objective on a lot of things, but you may be very focused on your faith, and you're you're very non-objective about your faith, because your faith is your guiding principle. It is your value in life. And that's okay. Mm-hmm. Because we need to have faith. We need to have some guiding value in our life, right? Being a believer of any religion or anything like that does not make you less of a person of value. right? Doesn't make you more one way or the other. It makes you who you are.
But I love the diversity that our industry has. Like bringing together different mindsets and worldviews is what makes us more agile, you know?
It's what makes us unbelievable. Guys, Charity Wright, I mean, I am going for sure to have her back on next year. We are going to have a bunch of really fun conversations. I understand that 2021 needs to be the year where geopolitics meets cybersecurity, and it's got to be met in the boardroom. As a CISO, I know that the conversation I gave you about Sunni and Shia Muslims was a conversation I gave 6 months ago to my board.
That's excellent.
And it was a conversation I gave them because I needed them to understand where we operate, and we operate in some of those countries, what the kind of cyber attacks we face, but they have to understand the long-term strategy of it from an investment perspective. Yeah. So that's really important. And we'll continue to do that because we need to be able to have those conversations, because cyber is no longer a standalone. It's not a bunch of people against one organization. It's a nation state deploying a bunch of assets, some criminal to weaken you economically, and some espionage to gain your trade secrets and to weaken your value in order to really swamp you. We're being attacked from every single direction, and we've got to be able to start to learn how to defend ourselves, but that it requires more private-public relationships. Absolutely. And that's going to require whatever administration is sworn in on January 20th to pick up the mantle and go, we can't do this like we've been doing it.
You say it like there's a doubt.
I say it because I have I've seen both plans allegedly, and I dislike both of them significantly. Yeah. So
that could probably be a whole nother podcast episode. Yeah.
It is. It's probably a series of podcast episodes. So shout out to everyone. Merry Christmas, Charity. Thank you for coming on, guys. I hope you enjoyed this event. This video will be on YouTube here just shortly, so you can watch it there and share it as well. So tune in there. We're off. I'll be back on Monday for our practitioner brief next week, and it'll be a full week. And then on January, new content, new stuff, very exciting stuff coming up. So make sure you guys are part of it as well. Charity, thanks so much. Folks, thanks so much for watching. Merry Christmas to all. Happy holidays. We'll be back. Until then, take care.